The 2023 NHL trade deadline has officially come to a close, and with much speculation and anticipation of what the Toronto Maple Leafs would do on their final day of the deadline, Kyle Dubas went and did nothing. Breaking down the final day of trade deadline, Kyle Dubas' press conference, and what the next steps are, all here in this video. What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome back to Leafs Digest. If you're new here, or if you've been here before and you haven't hit that subscribe button, please make sure to do so. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the playoffs. We are getting closer and closer, and every subscriber counts. So if you haven't hit subscribe already, please make sure to do so on this video. You can also hit like. That helps us out a lot. And of course, if I say things during this video that you agree with or disagree with, you have questions about, please make sure to let me know in the comments below your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear how you guys feel about today's deadline and what went on. And if you feel like enough was done with this Leafs team, if you were shocked, if you were surprised, if this felt right to you, if this is what you were expecting, let me know in the comments below, especially as we go throughout the video. But three different things we'll cover here today. We're going to start with what went on today on the deadline day. Number two, we'll get to Kyle Dubas' press conference, and finally, we'll go to the next step. So let's start with what went on deadline day. All right, so for the Leafs trade deadline day, it was insanely quiet. Surrounding this team all the way leading up to deadline day, we basically heard little pieces of noise here and there from different insiders around the NHL who kind of sat here and said, oh, well, they might be in on this guy. We've heard they've called about this guy. They're trying to acquire so-and-so, but nothing ever came to fruition based on what the insiders were saying. Ultimately, what ended up happening was Kyle Dubas went out on his own terms, made the trades, and then we found out about them. There was no speculation leading up of this guy might go here, this guy might go here, none of that. Nobody really had any idea what the Leafs were up to. So the Leafs end up going out and making their moves, and ultimately today ended up being insanely quiet as well. No rumors, no news, nothing about Leafs have called about this guy, Leafs have called about that guy. It was the most quiet day for the Toronto Maple Leafs you could have ever imagined on a deadline day, especially where they've already started to go all in or already have gone all in. And the pressure is on to not only win the Stanley Cup, but first and foremost, make it out of the first round for the first time. The pressure is on. We thought, hey, we're sitting here, there's going to be more to come, and it didn't. Leading up to this, we heard Sheldon Keefe say, my lines aren't going to be set until after Friday when I know who's here and who's not. Nylander said Dubas has been really busy. We're expecting more moves. It led everyone around the league, especially insiders, sitting there saying Dubas has yet to make his final move. He's yet to make his final splash, and yet today's deadline passed, and nothing happened from this Leafs team. We sat here waiting and expecting a trade to trickle in after the deadline, and yet it never came. What we saw out of this Leafs team on Thursday night is the final roster. That is it. That is what we're looking for going into the playoffs. What we're looking for this year as the final team of what we will see in an effort to win the Stanley Cup. And a lot of the day I sat there wondering who could come here, what might fit, and why trades weren't happening. Why has nothing come in on the final day? And we didn't get the answers to that until Kyle Dubas' press conference. So, in Kyle Dubas' press conference, it was very interesting. There was a few things to note. I'll try to break down some of the ones that I felt were most important. The first thing it's a question that I was asked about in regards to the amount of moves that were made. Do you feel like Kyle Dubas has made too many moves? So from my personal perspective, the answer was no, I don't think so. We upgraded on some necessary areas, and we went out and we got some depth in certain areas, whether guys go down or we feel like somebody could rotate into another position based on versatility. We've added all these pieces surrounding this team, and that's kind of where it's at. I don't think it's too many. I think that the group that's in here, in this room, is comfortable with having change around them. It's not going to affect them too much. And effectively what Kyle Dubas said in his press conference, it echoed those sentiments. He did say that he never set out to make a ton of moves. He just wanted the pieces that they felt they needed. They went out and got them and never felt like it changed too much. And most importantly of all this, Kyle Dubas referenced numerous times the fact that he spent a lot of time around this team. He spent a lot of time around the core group. He was around them, asked questions, had meetings, talked to them, basically trying to find out how they would be affected by new guys coming into this room and how much they could handle before he went out and made these moves. He tried to get a better understanding, and he ultimately walked away from it feeling like this Leafs group could handle a decent amount of change. That's what they did, and the one thing to remember in this as well, it wasn't brought up in the press conference, but they really only moved on from 2 guys despite bringing in all the guys that they did. Sandin obviously leaves, Engvall leaves, but outside of that, you're not experiencing too much change with this Leafs team at this point. So it's not like this Leafs team is a brand new look Leafs team going into the playoffs. Some of the other things that were brought up by Dubas in his press conference was that he made the moves on Tuesday in regards to Sandin and Engvall, the moves that essentially led us to believe a lot more was coming when you get a pick back in the Sandin deal, when you bring back another guy in Gustafsson. Those moves were made early so that everything could fit in. This wasn't necessarily, hey, we're getting these guys so that we can trade them on Friday, so we can trade them down the road. It had nothing to do with that. In fact, it was a whole lot more about, we know what we're going to do, and what we're going to do is probably nothing other than reactivate Matt Murray on his contract. We have to fit that in. And the other piece is leaving a roster spot, a contract spot, and enough cap space for Matthew Knies to come and join this team. And that's ultimately what we're looking at for the end goals here. Matthew Knies coming to this team and Matt Murray joining back onto this roster off of the injured reserve. That's about it. They just made sure they had enough space for that, and that was that. Then the other thing that he talked about was the Tuesday move, acquiring Gustafsson in the Sandin trade. He was offered another pick, and they decided, no. We're going to get the guy who can play the second power play because Sandin moving out obviously eliminates that for us. Gustafsson is a guy who they had on their radar. The coaching staff they like what he can do. They felt that they could fit him in here. So they went out and did that, and they weren't planning on making any more moves after that point, barring injury. Now, the other thing that was discussed in all of this is the fact that this Leafs D-core has dealt with injuries this season. They have some guys who are maybe a little bit older and injury prone, so bringing in extra depth pieces to kind of facilitate that helps you out a whole lot more so that you don't have to look to Timmins and Mac Hollowell and Mete and Jordy Ben to be the pieces to get it done. You can look at a guy like Timothy Liljegren, Justin Hall, then start looking down at Jordy Benz and the rest of the group to fill in spots if it really, really desperately comes to that point, which you obviously hope that it doesn't. No goaltending moves today for the Maple Leafs, but Kyle Dubas addressed in the press conference, and as there's not much to say on this, he just kind of felt it did not need to be addressed at this deadline. They have confidence in their goalies. The real concern with Murray is injuries, but they look at Joseph Woll and they feel like they got something there. Hence why they've got him for another couple of years. They're giving him some ice time. They're giving him some looks. Obviously, that's based on injuries, but regardless, they still feel like they got a good piece in Joseph Woll. They weren't looking to go out and spend anything on bringing in another goaltender here. He talked about reasons why they got Gustafsson, help out on the power play, getting Schenn added to the fact that they had a lack in strength and size from a physical defenseman on the back end. Schenn brings that piece. It's different from what they had. And then the final thing that he touched on that I felt was interesting was why they have what is different in this team going forward. He said he felt like it was exemplified in the game against Calgary in the third period, in which this team was able to grit down, be competitive, be physical, and shut things down. That from that standpoint, that is what they were looking for. That's how they felt that they got different. And he feels essentially, without saying it, that the upgrade on Kerfoot and an upgrade on Sandin basically improves the competitiveness of this team where maybe it was lacking before. So that is essentially Kyle Dubas' press conference in regards to today's deadline, what happened, what did not happen, and why things did not happen from Kyle Dubas. There wasn't too much to break down from it. I just more so felt like it was interesting because it's kind of what what we had expected as Leafs fans. I just think that we were on a different page than Kyle Dubas, thinking that Tuesday's moves set them up for a move on Friday, when in reality, all that they were looking for was bringing Murray back and adding Nyes into this roster when he's done at university, and they've set themselves up to do that. That was what Tuesday's moves were for. They did it successfully. End of story. So all the insiders out there who basically said Dubas isn't done, leading us to believe Dubas wasn't done, they were wrong. Now, final piece of this will be what is next. For me, next steps of this team, be competitive as hell. And I mean that in every single way. Yes, obviously when you play against other teams, be competitive. You want to do that. You want to win a Stanley Cup. But most importantly here, which I think will lead to that, is internal competition. You have an abundance of players in different spots, and believe me, they're all going to get opportunities because that's what Sheldon Keefe does. Roster limits open up today so they can add more players to their roster. They can bring in a 13th forward. You don't have to run with what you've had before. It is a little bit more free. They will likely continue to add players or rotate players through this roster, through this lineup, and see who fits where. Now that you know what the lineup is in terms of the roster of here's our forwards, D, and goalies, now it's time to figure out the lines. Who plays with who plays in what role, what matchups do they play, can you play power play, penalty kill, what needs to change going forward, what is the best build out of this team. And for me, looking at this, you have an abundance of riches at defense. You can figure out what you want there, whether you want fast, skill, speed in that position, or if you want to look at another area and go, hey, let's go with some physicality on this team. You now have that option with this Leafs blue line. And on forward, you're essentially set. It's where does Nyes fit? Where does Kerfoot fit? Where does Zach Aston Reese fit? Outside of that, everything else is basically set, and now you're just going to determine how the lineup shake out. So that is ultimately the next steps here, is just figuring out who plays with who, what roles they play in, and who is and is not in the lineup come opening day. It's not going to be overly aggressive or overly different from anything we've seen to this point, but that's about it for this Leafs trade deadline. Nothing happens on the final day. All the moves were made ahead of time. The Dubas Press Conference is interesting because he basically just explained to us that we were all on a different page than he was going into Friday and what those Tuesday moves meant. So very interesting to see from him. But Leafs fans, if you enjoyed the content, please make sure to subscribe to this channel. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the playoffs. Every subscription counts. So if you are watching for the first time, or if you've been here before and haven't hit subscribe, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments below your thoughts on the day, if you were surprised to see no trades, and how you think this team can fare going forward. I'm also curious. Give me your best lineups going into the playoffs. Who do you want to see playing with who, and why? Leafs fans, thank you guys so much for tuning in here today. Look forward to seeing everyone as we rapidly approach the playoffs here. We'll continue with the post-game live streams and more videos like this. But until then, thanks for watching. Keep believing.